NATO allies are now trying to decipher what this weekend's brief armed rebellion means for the war in Ukraine. The president of Lithuania, which will host a gathering of NATO leaders next month, tweeted, quote, "The Kremlin regime reaps what it sows. All the violence directed at Ukraine has backfired." On Saturday, as Prigozhin's rebellion was underway, President Biden called the leaders of the UK, France, and Germany. The White House had a short readout of the calls, saying that the U.S. and its NATO allies, quote, affirmed their unwavering support for Ukraine. That leaves the question of whether the events of the last 48 hours change the kind of military support and assistance that NATO partners are willing to provide. I have to wonder whether the chef's mutiny might have an impact on the thinking around that. Joining me now is Ivo Daalder. He served as the U.S. ambassador to NATO from 2009 to 2013. He's now the president of the Chicago Council of Global Affairs. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I wanted to start with something you tweeted out, that in 1991, Gorbachev survived a coup attempt only to be out a few months later. So as you're looking at the events of the last 48 hours, even with the deal struck, the mysterious deal, what's your sense at this point of Putin's long-term grasp of power?
Well, no one knows, of course, but clearly the last 48 hours have really weakened him in a way that we haven't seen really in his entire presidency, which is now in its 24th year, or indeed in any time since the end of the Soviet Union. We have a leader who has been directly challenged in the same way that Gorbachev was directly challenged, which is a sign of weakness. And although it is true that no one else has come out to support Prigozhin around Vladimir Putin, at the same time, these forces were able to move about 800 kilometers without any resistance, and whatever resistance there was quickly shot out of the sky. And it was only an outsider, Lukashenko, who was able to find a way out of this. Right now, everyone in the Kremlin, starting with Vladimir Putin, is looking around, figuring out who can they trust, who's about to knife him in the back, who is going to defend them. And that's going to be there for quite a while. It tends to be that revolutions eat their own children. We may see that in this case that is happening as well. And so it is a really dangerous period because on the one hand, Ukraine is now launching full force its counteroffensive. But on the other hand, we don't know what's happening inside the Kremlin. Putin hasn't been seen or heard from. We don't know what the military leadership of Russia is. It's a deeply uncertain time. And I think that's what the NATO leaders were talking about, how to make sure that we don't make it any worse than it already is. And at the same time, make sure that Ukraine finds a way to benefit, because that ultimately is what this is about.
You mentioned uncertainty about the leadership of the Ministry of Defense of Russia. Of course, we don't know the answer to that at this point. But what are you going to be watching for in terms of whether or not Putin's calculus changes in Ukraine, whether he is more emboldened, or if any of the last 48 hours changes his approach there?
Yeah, I think we're going to look at two things. One is to see whether, in fact, the current leadership will remain in power. That is Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu and the Chief of the General Staff, Valery Gerasimov. They are the target of extraordinary criticism, not only coming from Prigozhin, but also from military bloggers and everyone else. It is really hard to see how these guys who have really bollocksed up this war in a remarkable way can stay in power. So that's one thing to look at. The second is that, Russia doesn't have many military options, but what they do have is escalation options. And I do worry, and I think people in the White House are paying very close attention to the possibility of perhaps preparations to blow up the nuclear power station in Zaporizhzhia. It just blown up in an incredible way, the hydroelectric dam in the north, which has caused extraordinary, catastrophic damage. And we have to worry about the possibility of Vladimir Putin using a nuclear weapon. So I hope that the White House and the Defense Department are not only looking at this closely, but making it very clear to the Russians that any form of escalation, a deliberate nuclear incident, would lead to catastrophic consequences, as Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, had said last October, last time we were in this position, and that those catastrophic consequences are that we would intervene to end this war and make sure that Ukraine wins.
Now, you've been in these rooms, you've been on these calls and these moments where there's tension around the world. There is a NATO meeting coming up in a couple of weeks, but lots of calls in between and conversations. How do you anticipate key NATO partners are watching this? Will this change anything about that meeting, or what are the other things that they're calculating as a coalition?
So I think there's going to be an attempt led by the United States to say, let's keep cool heads here. Let's not look at this as sort of the way we can finally find a way for Russia to be dug under, to get rid of Vladimir Putin. That's not for today. For today, we need to make sure that we do everything that we can and continue to do to help Ukraine win this war. And secondly, to make very clear to everyone in Russia, Vladimir Putin and everybody around them, that escalation would have dire consequence for them. But that also means that cool heads need to prevail. It means that we don't do things that provoke, that lead to the very escalation that we're trying to prevent. So it's a balancing act, and it means that the White House and others will have to talk to some of our allies who may see this as an opportunity to finally go after Vladimir Putin and say, you know, that's really not where we want it to be. We want to help Ukraine, but we also don't want to make this the beginning of something much worse.
A time for cooler heads. Ambassador Ivo Daalder, thank you for your time this afternoon.